I just published this as an ebook a couple months ago. It's not published by an official publisher, so take that for what it's worth. Good. Anyway,
There it goes.
one more time. Why do humans have religion? That is the question. Is religion nurture only or nature too? Did religion evolve, and is it evolutionarily adaptive or an accidental byproduct? I'm going to take the opportunity to poll you. Evolutionarily adaptive, let's see hands. Not so accidental byproduct. How about undecided? All right, we're wide open tonight. What? Yeah, all of it, okay. This is about the personal experience and feeling of religion, not about doctrine, belief, or institutions of religion. In this organization, in this group, I've attended a couple of these, and of course people, rightly so, criticize churches and all the BS that goes on with institutional religions. And I'm completely sympathetic to that. And they do all kinds of stuff that some of it you just saw and crafted this presentation. But there is something else going on. And the fact is, for tens of thousands of years, people in tribes have had this experience of religion, and it's a personal, individual thing. So that's a different story than what happens when you get groups of people together and have hierarchical religious institutions and doctrine and dogma. I'm talking about what happens to the individual. So the fact that religion might be 30,000 to 100,000 years old in tribes, and these kinds of monotheistic religions that we're used to criticizing are maybe at most 5,000 years old, means that religion has existed in humans 80 to 90% of human existence. So sort of have to shift gears when talking about this. Oh. So what are the usual suspects for why we have religion? Group cohesion. Let's see hands.
What?
Religion functions to keep societies connected to each other. Solve existential mysteries. Why we die, where our purpose in life is, and divided nicely in hyperactive agency detection. Who knows about that? Just a couple of people. We're not going to get into it. We can talk about it later if you want to. Go ahead. Stuart Guthrie's a professor, or maybe was a professor at Fordham in New York, and he said, what did he say? Anthropology and other humanistic studies lack an adequate theory of religion. They have found no single paradigm, no theory or even definition of religion is generally accepted. He is not alone. Even a lot of the people who study theories of religion, why we have religion, will acknowledge that despite the usual suspects, no one really knows why we have religion. There's a big gap in understanding. None of these previous explanations really do the job. And in fact, the fact that we have these very disparate explanations also indicates, to me at least, that they really don't know what they're talking about. A new perspective is needed. After thousands of years of natural philosophy and science examining it, the purpose of religion remains unknown. It requires looking at the problem with a new set of eyes. Who's ready for a paradigm shift? Okay, well, we have some free thinkers here. We'll see if you can be convinced. My explanation for the evolution of religion. Hold on to your seats. Intrinsic religion is a compensating mechanism for higher order consciousness. What does that mean? Three legs of a stool is my metaphor. Number one, consciousness is more of a problem for humans than a benefit. It is certainly a benefit, and it's actually done for humans what we see today. We have everything. We've taken over the world. We can control our environment, we have, you know, we can memes and we can pass information down through the generations. So that's the benefit of, we'll look more at that. The second leg is emotions, which are the adaptive arbiters of behavior, and religion elicits emotion. Pretty much the only universal thing religion does. Therefore, religion is adaptive and evolutionarily evolved. We'll look at that. The third leg, rituals are the behaviors of religion and all elicit emotion while suppressing aspects of higher order consciousness. It's a pretty tall order to try and show all that, huh? It's pretty radical. So first we're going to look at consciousness, which is, out of these three, is the most difficult thing for people to wrap their heads around, because consciousness tells us every day that we're running the show. So what is consciousness? Even more than religion, you know, we have these various definitions of religion and no one's really sure what religion is. Consciousness is even worse. No one, you can do all kinds of reading on consciousness and you don't get any kind of consistent answer about it. And as far as what's going on in the brain with consciousness, they're still far away from understanding it that well. But I'm going to approach it enabling conditional information. Okay. Who knows Tubi and Cosmitas? I'm disappointed. Thank you. They are professors of evolutionary psychology at Santa Barbara and have published a lot of stuff about evolutionary psychology. They say, in one article, when hominids evolved or elaborated adaptations that could use information based on relationships that were only true temporarily, locally, or contingently, rather than universally and stably, this opened up a new and far larger world of potential information than was previously available or available previously. Context-dependent information can now be used to guide behavior to a far greater extent than has been possible formerly. So in their somewhat academic jargon, what they're saying is the big advantage that humans have is that a lot of what other animals, the behavior of other animals is more so controlled by instinct, and the further down the phylogenetic table you or chart you go, more instinct controls their behavior. The higher up you go towards us, learning takes over more so, and instinct less so. And so we are the champions of this particular feat of being able to have contingent information, to be able to learn, to be able to modify our environment in our own lifetime. Okay, good. Higher order consciousness reduces dependence on instinct and hands over portions of behavior to learning and culture. I kind of said that. Okay. But there is a downside. You go to the behavior. This advance, however, was purchased at a cost. The exploitation of this exploding universe of potentially representable information creates a massive... I don't have to read this to you. It's a lot. What they're saying is that we have all these choices that our consciousness has given us. And we assume that that consciousness is capable of actually providing decisions and choices and the knowledge necessary to handle it all, except it's not true. We are not capable, there's a limit to what we can do, what our consciousness can handle. But the fact that it gives us all these choices is actually overwhelming. And so what happens is, we have mechanisms that restrict the choices that we have to make. One of the choices in a very large view is called cognitive biases. And all humans are subject to cognitive biases. It's not like we have a choice and we decided. But you can go on Wikipedia and you can see a list of about 50 or 100, I don't know how many cognitive biases that psychology has identified. But I can't go into too much detail, we can talk about it later if you want to. But this is just one aspect of the limitations that consciousness has, is we have too many choices and we can't cope with it. Another aspect of consciousness, or to say what consciousness is not, is in control. Bauer, Masacampo, or a couple professors in the Southeast, Florida, South Carolina, or somewhere, they wrote an article called Conscious Thought is for Facilitating Social and Cultural Interactions. And in that article, they tell us what consciousness is good for, which is social and cultural interactions. But in the first 4 or 5 pages, they do a wonderful job of summarizing the problems of consciousness. We are prepared to concede the correctness of much, not all, of the negative evidence against consciousness. Many theories have assumed that conscious thought is for perceiving the environment and for directly controlling action, but the detractors have revealed its inadequacies to those functions. The naive view that the conscious self knows all about what the person is doing and can direct behavior or will has come under fire from several well thought out and empirically supported perspectives. Let me begin to kill a horse for you before we start beating the dead horse. Empirically supported. Now, we don't list what those empirically supported, what the information is, where it comes from, but I can tell you what it is. You can go to the article, and they do make citations to tell you the information, the other sources, the other academics who are telling us that consciousness is not doing what most people think it's doing. That most of our behavior by far is directed by unconscious processes. But we think it's run by our consciousness. It's so bad. Yes, Ramachandran, anybody? A couple more. He wrote several books. One is called Phantoms in the Brain, about phantom limbs and some other neurological problems. But he also wrote a book called A Brief History of Consciousness. And on the very first page of that book, he said, your conscious life, in short, is nothing but an elaborate post hoc rationalization of things you do for other reasons. Think about that for one moment while I figure out where I am here.
Sherman says that.
Who? Sherman, okay. I'm not familiar with him, but I'd like to be.
First you have beliefs and then you justify them.
Yes. Beliefs. You have beliefs and then you justify them. But it does not mean that the beliefs are based on reality. You try to, yes, that's right. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that was a very quick hit on consciousness. There's a ton more to talk about, but we don't have time. And we can see about it later if you want to. The second leg of our stool now is about the emotions, which are behavioral adaptations that ensure evolutionary success. Antonio Damasio. Oh, man. Neuroscientist at USC in Los Angeles. He says the pervasiveness of emotion in our development, subsequently in our everyday experience, connects virtually every object or situation in our experience by virtue of conditioning to the fundamental values of homeostatic regulation. Homeostasis, right? The biological term for the things that all animals and plants do to survive. Reward and punishment, pleasure and pain, approach withdrawal, personal advantage, disadvantage, and inevitably good in the sense of survival or evil in the sense of death. Whether we like it or not, this is the natural human condition. Joseph Ledoux, neuroscientist in the East Coast, he's written some books about emotions mostly, which are the behaviors that take care of the fundamental problems of survival. And humans are no different than any other animal in that it's the emotions that are primarily responsible for our behavioral survival. I didn't really say what emotions were. Again, difficult depending who you talk to, but essentially they're where is it here? I can't find it. But anyway, it's you know what emotions are. It's physiological states is what they are. That's about the best I can do at this point. So that's all you get on emotion at this point. Now we're in the third leg. Rituals are the behaviors of religion. when we're talking about tribes tens of thousands of years ago, and you want to think about humans as biological organisms, what you want to look at is behavior, not belief. Belief just makes it tough. We'll look at that in a second, but the ones that I focus on are music, art, dance, and movement, mythology, and prayer. Now, there's other kinds of rituals, but these are the ones that are most germane, primarily because they're associated with religion. And these are behaviors that, while there are sort of these kinds of behaviors in animals, these are pretty much the ones that are unique to humans, as it is religion. I mean, we can talk about humans as having special characteristics. You know, they used to think that we were the only tool makers and we were the only ones with language and this and that. And it turns out that pretty much everything that we used to think that humans were unique at, we're not unique at. We're better at a lot of it, but not so much unique, except for perhaps religion, which we don't think any other animals have. And these are the behaviors of religion the tribes perform for tens of thousands of years. Ritual is seemingly non-utilitarian and evolutionarily expensive in the sense that, you know, doing all these things don't seemingly have any benefit in terms of gathering food, shelter, defending your territory. You know, you can make the case that it has to do with that business about social cohesion, but that's a step beyond. Just the actual habits or the rituals themselves, in and of themselves, do not seem to be beneficial in an evolutionary way. The first observed historically in ancient tribal religions, and they remain ubiquitous in all cultures. And all rituals elicit emotions and interfere with consciousness. How many of you like music, listen to music? Well, you are some irrational people, because there's no good reason for that, is there? I thought you were free thinkers and rational people here. I'm kind of disappointed. Boyer and Lenhart wrote an article, it's called Why Ritualize Behavior. They say ritual lacks rational motivation and causes the swamping of working memory, which permits the temporary suppression of intrusive thoughts. What's working memory? Again, a general term for a lot of the things that I also associate with the higher order consciousness. Short-term memory, learning, reasoning, and solving tasks. And ritual seems to suppress that. Pretty strange. Okay, we're almost done. Most people think of religion in terms of belief. And certainly that's true. Religion has a lot to do with belief and vice versa. Except that belief is not just specific to religion. We have political beliefs, we have social beliefs, we have beliefs about everything. So there's nothing specific about religion and beliefs except that they happen to go together very well. We observe that. Baird and Keel did this study in which they presented God to people in vignettes in different forms. Sometimes it's more doctrine and dogma, and other times it's just a story. And then they would get people's feedback about the beliefs. And what they found is that people seem to possess and use more than one concept of God in real-life activities, and those parallel concepts have some markedly different properties. You know, during this organization, that people believe all kinds of nice stuff. But at the same time, it's also not necessary to use belief as the basis for understanding why people have religion. Yes, people believe what they believe, but it's not why we have religion. It's a secondary effect. It led Pascal Boyer to say, people don't believe what they believe in. So, that's it. Need to get through this quickly to give everybody time. I have a number of websites. The first one is where you can go and read the book online. It's fairly long, but feel free, obviously. The others are links to where you can buy the ebook. Certainly I would not object if you decided to do that. And I have reserved the right to ask the first question. And and then you can bombard me should you so feel motivated. A number of people thought and believe that or religion is an accidental byproduct, which Dawkins and Tinker and others believe as well. Assuming that a byproduct is a biological phenomenon, can you give me some examples of non-human byproducts and whether that relates or doesn't relate to religion as a byproduct? Anybody? Was the question clear enough? Okay, so some of you believe religion is an accidental byproduct of other phenomenon, right? So, but the idea is that if the byproducts are biological, they're not just a human thing, or maybe you think that it's only in humans that this byproduct phenomenon exists. If you think that a byproduct is biological, then there should be byproducts in other animals. Forget religion for the moment. Just name me any byproduct in a non-human animal. What's a byproduct? In the back.
Behavior in wolves.
What?
Pack behavior in wolves.
That's a byproduct?
Well, honey would be a byproduct. That's for honey.
I'm sorry?
Honey?
Hunting.
Honey.
I guess we have a problem with what a byproduct is. Honey in bees is their food. It seems fairly beneficial for them. It is evolved trained to store honey. I like that. That's good. But I did want to address the fellow in the back who said hunting and wolves. Is that right? Pack behavior. Well, I mean, I think there is something to say for social behaviors in animals. I think that is generally an evolutionary adaptation that they have packs and defend and hunt together. And I mean, clearly a single wolf is going to have a hard time bringing down animals compared to the pack hunting behavior. But the slime one I like a lot. That's a good byproduct. He said, so slugs have slime. That's a byproduct. But the problem with the byproduct in animals is that there's very little information in it in terms of telling us anything. The problem I have with the byproduct is that it hardly exists as a meaningful theory for anything other than humans. And suddenly, for humans, they want to take byproduct and make this whole thing about religion that we've had for tens of thousands of years that continues to be pervasive. It just doesn't wash. And yet, here's Dawkins and Tinker and a bunch of other heavyweights talking about it. And I'm just, really? It just doesn't make any sense. How can something... So, here's something else that Dawkins said. He said, and this is in the God Delusion, Darwinian selection habitually targets and eliminates waste. Nature is a miserly accountant, grudging the pennies, watching the clock, punishing the smallest extravagance. Right? And then what does he say? About 20 pages later in the God Delusion, and a number of other places, he talks about religion being like an infection of the mind. Like this error in judgment that then somehow gets caught up and is passed along. Those two concepts are incompatible with each other. If you believe in evolution, which most of you here, or all of you here, do, then the idea that nature is a miserly accountant and punishing the smallest extravagance would not tolerate this error of the mind, as Dawkins puts it. It just wouldn't work. Yes, sir.
Okay, so there's a bit of a problem with that question. And that is the question, why is religion a byproduct? The thing is, religion is not just one thing. You can't just define it like unnecessary products, but certain parts can be identified as having a function, an adaptive evolutionary function, right?
Sure. It's a tough one. Obviously, I have my idea. A lot of people have their ideas.
What are we calling religion?
Well, that's it. So I made the definition right up front. Oh, I'm sorry. He says that religion is many things, and so it depends on how you view religion, so that some aspects of religion might in fact be byproducts, and other aspects of religion might be adaptive and have, say, a genetic basis. So it depends. You're right. So at the very beginning, I said I'm not talking about institutional religion and beliefs or hierarchies. Those are, for me, those are political entities. But if you look at it from a point of view of of the individual, and by the way, so in evolutionary terms, there's this concept called multi-level selection. Dawkins sort of broke new ground when he wrote the selfish gene, because he said it was the gene that was the level of selection. A body is a gene's way of making more genes, right? But then most biologists in the last 50 years think it's the individual that is the primary carrier of selection, or the selection works on the individual. But then there's this thing, this concept that's carried. David Sloan Wilson is a professor at New York State, who is pushing this idea towards that really moves towards group selection. It's very controversial in the biological community. But for the most part, at least today, what's accepted is individuals. Each organism is the basis for natural selection. It's the individual who lives or dies, survives, and reproduces to make more offspring. So what I'm saying is I'm looking at the question in terms of the individual, not in terms of groups. So yes, religion is certainly seen by people, and rightly so, in terms of its hierarchy, in terms of the church and all the nonsense that they propagate. But from the question I'm asking, why do humans have religion? It's at the individual level. And this is why we have it. And by the way, you're all religious because you all like music and art and dance. And it's good because it allows us to change. You want to change the argument. Don't get trapped in this idea, or at least if you're going to talk about the hierarchy of religion and the churches and all that stuff, you can have that argument, and I'm right behind you. But if you want to understand why humans have religion, and you are religious because you do these irrational behaviors, so it changes the argument a lot. Yes, sir.
Well, one of the criticisms of atheism is that all of these political monsters like Hitler and Mao Zedong were atheists. And when you describe religion as a behavior, then it kind of opens up a whole new level of inquiry. Isn't Maoism another behavior? Isn't it a religion type behavior? And then the question is, should we change our behavior? Or is it our thinking that we need to change?
The question is, or the statement, Mao and Stalin and Hitler were presumably not religious and didn't promulgate religion. And I like that. And the reason I like it is because it goes to what I said about religious hierarchies propagating their beliefs. It doesn't matter if it's a religious hierarchy or a political hierarchy. It's all the same effort to, as Scott showed, I think, earlier, the idea of the Dawkins meme idea needs to propagate itself. Well, even if you're not religious, if you're a Nazi or a communist or whatever you are, you have ideas you're trying to propagate. So, you want to call it a religion? In a certain sense, sure. That's fine. But it's at that level of the institutional level or the political level. Fine. But that's not what I'm talking about.
Well, you're talking about but you introduced the idea that we shouldn't necessarily look at the tenets of the religion, but the behavior. And the behaviors are almost indistinguishable between like Maoism and I don't know, Al Qaeda. What is it? The Taliban, Wahhabism or something.
The idea of behaviors at a political level is tough because what does that really mean? I mean, there's all kinds of people doing all kinds of things. Some of those people are going out and killing each other. Others are just trying to have their little farm and to survive and to raise their kids. I mean, what behaviors are we talking about?
Well, you're mobilizing people behind an idea, and they they're putting themselves in a subordinate position as individuals to this higher idea and this higher truth.
So the point that you're making is that
when you talk about religion as behavior, you can also include as behaviors these boogeymen that atheists have to face all the time: Hitler, Stalin, and Mao.
Does everybody hear what he's saying?
So that's the problem. It's the behavior is the problem. It's this totalitarian mobilization behind ideology.
So let me try and break down a different way of looking at it, maybe. The behaviors of totalitarianism, of political effort, it gets really complicated in modern times. It's a little cleaner and easier, perhaps, to go back to the tribal times. Again, the 80 to 90% of human existence in these tribes. Those behaviors were not that different than they are now. They're pretty much the same, except we just have better toys, right? Better ways to kill each other. And better technology for fun, like this. But in tribes, what were their behaviors? Some of those behaviors were of political nature. Tribes fought each other. They fought for territory, they fought for women. They would invade each other and kill the men, steal the women, turn them into wives. And they had religion. They danced, and they had music, and they made art on the rocks, or they carved, they made tools that they added, like pottery. They added designs to those, which they didn't have to do just for utilitarian purposes, but they tended to add that extra layer, that aesthetic quality that meant something to them. I don't know if I answered the question very well.
I think in a group situation, there are some sort of behaviors that you might think that some animals have, such as grooming amongst baboons or gorillas, or deferring amongst cats, which the grooming is not important for their survival. It's important to make the whole group cohesive.
Right, so the point is that animals have various behaviors to increase social cohesion, like grooming. But it's like there's a number of social behaviors that tie the group together or not. I mean, so dominant hierarchy. Many social animals have dominant hierarchies, which are conflicts internal to the group to establish who's the dominant, the alpha. As another extreme.
No, that's incorrect. There's a leader, and they're made up that they want to follow a leader. But when they are in second place, they don't feel terrible. Or if they're in the last place, they don't feel terrible. The other one knows who is the leader, so I know my place, so we can all get along and stay in a group.
That's right. They all need to know the hierarchy so they know where they fit. I agree with that. But the function of that is to make the group work. If you have members of the group who don't cooperate and go off and do their own thing, it makes it harder for the group. You know, if you go on a hunt and then the guy says, "Oh, I'm going to go get that thing and eat it, but I'm not going to, include everybody else." These are not necessarily good examples. I'm not sure. Tell me again what you're going for here.
these are very, very simple, primitive ways of keeping a group together. The grooming or purring.
That's right.
Other things.
That's true.
And when you get soon, once we became Homo sapiens, that we were much more sophisticated. But we've already been in a group for a long, long time. And so now we're adding other things on top of this group situation that become even more ridiculous. We get into things like supernatural.
One thing we haven't talked about, and I purposely didn't mention, is why we believe in God. We people believe in God. And I'm sorry to bring it up because it sort of deviates from what your point was. And I think I'm going to try and get back to your point first before we go into any other stuff. Yes, there's all these mechanisms like grooming for helping the interaction of organisms, of individuals in the group. And then you were suggesting that as we evolved into human beings that we got complicated and that perhaps those other behaviors like grooming weren't sufficient. Is that fair? Or, I mean, I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Just like when we have language, now we could lie to each other. There's more complications can come along.
It's very complicated, absolutely.
Intelligence taking the group can be more complicated, and then there's more ways. If I can make fire, I can keep a bigger group over here until everybody knows fire, and we have to think of something else to keep the people.
Right.
They get more and more layers, more intelligent.
That's right, and more complexity, absolutely. So what he's saying is we get so intelligent that the complexity just increases. Now, somewhere in all that, I'm not saying that religion doesn't increase group cohesion. It does, but it's not the primary function. The primary function is about dealing with the problems of consciousness. Secondary effects are group cohesion and answering the existential mysteries. But it's like, why do we need to even answer the question, do other animals have to answer the existential mysteries? We do because we have consciousness. And, well, the people do. We are not a good example of what goes on in the big world. We're kind of an exception. Ryan.
Take the mic just so it's easier here.
Okay, so you were saying that, in a sense, music is very much like religion. So if you like music, you like religion, or religion, sort of like religion. But at what point do you, because you're talking about sort of this transcendent experience, right, where you feel elated about a certain thing. But at what point do you take that and you add in all of this dogma that we have attached to religion? Because if it was just about praying and feeling good about it, or meditating and feeling good about it, it's a huge step to then move forward to, homosexuals are evil. I mean, that does nothing but create something divisive rather than actually helping anybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So at what point do we move from just sort of this transcendent feeling into an organized religious system?
I just need to think about that. Could you say that one more time for me? Oh, yeah. So at what point do you go from transcendent feeling, that sort of, whether it's a dopamine release or whatever it is that you feel great about listening to music, to now I'm going to attach all this other baggage to it, that all these rules and laws and things that are necessary to have in order to also have this experience? Okay.
Yes, excellent question. Start with the transcendent, the emotional feelings that arise from the behaviors of religion. There's this other aspect of humanity that has belief. So, the fact is, humans have beliefs because that's their nature. Again, political, social, religious. So it almost doesn't matter what milieu, if you will, you're in. The humans are going to acquire beliefs. Now, that's sort of only half an answer. what specific beliefs they seem to be acquiring through religion seem pretty consistent, and this God thing is one of them. So it's not a idea that I have here, but there's a fellow named Daniel Wegner who wrote a book called The Illusion of Conscious Will, which is quite a mind blower, I think. Just the title of it will tell you what he's doing. He's another one of those professor types of these guys. He suggests that the reason people believe in God is because one of the downsides of consciousness is that, and this goes back to what Ramachandran said. He said that the business about the rationalization of what we do, post hoc rationalization. The reality is that people don't really know. They can't really perceive cause and effect in a very accurate way. This is his belief, and the other people have shared this, like Ramachandran as well. That what we think is the cause and effect tends not to be the cause and effect. And that, again, a compensating mechanism to assign causation externally. That's why people create gods and external entities, angels, devils, all kinds of things, cherubs, there's, ghosts. There's all kinds of things out there that people create that aren't real. But the purpose of doing that is to assign causation and responsibility, in a way, to those entities because we are incapable of, number one, knowing the causes of things, and number two, how can I say this? I'm not going to say it. I'm going to let you talk.
I'm going to jump on something you just said.
Okay.
If humans were not introduced to the concept of these things you're talking about, like angels and fairies and whatnot, would they believe these things on their own?
Everybody heard that?
Yeah.
So another thing that it sort of comes out of the Dawkins God delusion business is that these ideas just start. If you read the God delusion when he talks about this business, it's some kind of shaman who gets these ideas and then starts passing them along, and then generation to generation these ideas get passed on. But he sort of forgets to say, where do they come from? Did they just pop into somebody's head? Early in God delusion, Dawkins says, he just proves the existence of God, which is fine. He says, who created the Creator? That's one of his primary arguments for disproving the existence of God, and that's great. Who created the Creator? But he doesn't use the same logic when he talks about how religion is a virus that gets passed on from generation to generation. Where did it come from in the first place? And so you're asking, where did these ideas come from if they hadn't been, introduced? I mean, where did they come from? I think, and so here's another thought that I touch in the book a little bit, is I talk about Jung and I talk about the collective unconscious. Jung suggests in the collective unconscious. Collective unconscious? Carl Jung? He says these ideas are innate. They're actually genetic ideas. So, in the very first chapter of my book, I start out very early on with this metaphor about the Garden of Eden. What is the significance of the Garden of Eden? It is a metaphor that, and by the way, of course, many of you who know about this kind of stuff know that these stories in the Bible are not unique to the Bible, right? The story of Jesus and Mary, they existed earlier in previous societies like the Mesopotamians, these different societies had these same stories. So the story of the Garden of Eden is the story of, and metaphorically, the acquisition of consciousness, the tree of knowledge that Eve ate from and gave to Adam symbolizes our acquisition of consciousness. That was bad. because what it did is it got us in a whole heap of trouble, got us kicked out of paradise, because before we got consciousness, we were just instinctual, metaphorically, and somewhat true. And our whole existence since we got consciousness has been a big problem. And that's what religion was designed to solve, at least from the biblical story, but really from a greater level in terms of the collective unconscious. These stories exist here. These stories will keep coming up. It's not like just someone said, well, here's a cool story. They're in there. Yes, sir.
It's been shown that the human brain can be easily tricked and manipulated to believe things that are not true. And you couple that with the fact that there are psychotic people out there like Jim Jones who get their jollies out of controlling people, and they know exactly what they can feed into the weak and the feeble to get them to believe things that are not true. So how can you address that? What can you say about that?
People can be easily tricked. That is true. But instead of, while I agree with you, and certainly the way people can be manipulated bothers me a lot, the reality is that people are malleable. That's their nature. Part of it, I believe, has to do with the dominance hierarchy. That in order to have a society where people get along and cooperate and defend each other and work together, is there has to be certain malleability so that people will buy into whatever the dominant paradigm is. And so there'll always be someone who will take advantage of it. It's like game theory, and I shouldn't say that because I'm not that familiar with the idea, but it's like there's always the winners and losers, right? There's always the people who cooperate, and this is something that the animal behavior people look at. In order to have cooperation, that's a good thing, we think, for society, but it always means that there's someone who could take advantage of everybody else's cooperation for their own benefit. And so they theorize, and they make these mathematical models that there's a balance between the selfishness, if you will, and the altruism, the cooperation. And it's a constant up and down to balance that out. And if there's too much selfishness, society suffers. If there's too much cooperation, they become vulnerable to the cheaters. And so there's a lot of discussion in the biology world about that kind of thing. Brian?
Just wanted to say, okay, just do one last question. Anybody else that hasn't asked a question yet? Sorry, let me just... yeah, go ahead, sorry.
So I guess the thing that I'm most puzzled by is this idea of being able to talk about religion in the context of individual consciousness, because it seems sort of like talking about, the pancreas independent of the body, or the quarterback, the rest of the team. You can find examples, I suppose, of religion as an individual phenomenon. The medieval hermits who lived on top of a stone column. But overwhelmingly, religion has been a social phenomenon, and you can identify aspects of the individual that make the individual prepared to believe. You referred to, the hyperactive agency detective phenomenon, the idea that it's more evolutionarily adaptive to believe in the false positive and false negative. But I just don't get how you can look at religion as a phenomenon that is independent of society. It seems like something that classically, or that it seems like something that can only be understood in terms of some kind of multi-level selection process. If you're
That's for you, not for me.
Yes.
When you say religion, are you meaning more spirituality or like personal beliefs? Because I think every time, at least I'm getting up in the room, we hear religion, we're thinking of, as organized religion or it's just more ritual about the political system, rather than something intrinsic to a person, like a set of spirituality.
Right.
So you're saying you separate religion from spirituality in some respect?
Yeah, that makes your thesis at least more clear to me if I think of what you're saying as spirituality instead of organized religion.
Right.
That it involves to fulfill a need as, a sense of spirituality and maybe answer questions like the answers. Who's going to answer? However that looks like.
Well, it sort of does address this question, which is that how can you separate the social aspect from the individual aspect, and how can religion be an individual thing when we've always experienced it as a social thing? Everything about humanity is experienced pretty much as a social thing. But there are, I'm not going to be able to answer your question very easily, but I do state right up front that I'm addressing it as individuals. So what does that mean? So or consciousness. So one thing I didn't mention that I kind of overlooked when I should have said, I said consciousness is difficult to define. But what are the things that we think of as being parts of our higher order consciousness? Access to historical memory, choice and decision making, logic and rationality, our ability to learn, hyper-learning, self-awareness. These are the things, some of the things that we think of as consciousness. And these are things that individuals do. So, in terms of consciousness at least, without defining specifically what consciousness is, you take any one of those things and you look at the biology that is coming down now, for thousands of years, as I said, you have natural philosophers and people thinking about, what's human nature, Descartes and Plato and all these people. But they're always looking at it out of their own consciousness. But if consciousness is a problem to begin with, it's using the wrong tool to analyze it. In the last 50 years now, we have these biological tools that divorce us from our own consciousness, and they measure these things with tools that don't rely on us to look introspectively. So that we find that all this stuff about memory, and we've been talking a little bit about, some of these aspects of consciousness. They're not that accurate. In fact, they tend to be very inaccurate, and that for some, and even for me, it's a very difficult thing. If you read this book, The Illusion of Conscious Will by Wigner, he would have you believe that there's basically very little that we really know about ourselves. But I can't even buy that. We have to know something in order to do all this. So, but somewhere in there's a bit of truth about the balance of all these things. Now, having said the bit about consciousness, how can religion be about the individual? Well, if I'm saying that religion is about compensating for higher order consciousness, I'm changing the level of the playing field and saying, this is what we're talking about, is the behavior of religion in the individual, or the perception of religion, or the spirituality, or the numinosity, the feeling that an individual has about that there's something out there, that we're projecting ourselves out there. So that, we don't think animals are self-aware to the degree that we are, and that they don't project this thing. Sorry for going on and on. I'll try and wrap it up here. The thing that actually ticked me off about this, my whole idea, my whole thesis, a long time ago, was the realization that because of our consciousness and self-awareness, we have a better sense of self than any other animal. We think other apes and perhaps some other animals have a sense of self, but we have it way more. And by having a sense of self, it means that we also have a sense of non-self. So by having self, we also perceive non-self, what isn't us. And so as part of that sensation, a part of that realization, we can project out into the world separate from ourselves. We realize there's other things out there. That's another way of thinking about why we create gods, is because we know there's a difference between me and everything else that's out there. And in the process, along with our inability to understand cause and effect and reality in general, we project out our inner feelings and assign them to these external forces.
Thank you, Mitch. Let's give Mitch a big hand for this.